All this year, marchers across Ireland's cities and towns have continued to call for an end to violence and occupation.
Palestine! Free! Free! Palestine! Free! Free! Palestine! Occupation no more!
At a recent protest picket in downtown Dublin, there's no shouting, just the sound of supportive car horns. Polls this past year have found large majorities of people in Ireland support Palestinian self-determination, believe that Palestinians live under a form of apartheid rule in Israel, and consider Israeli attacks on Gaza to be unjustified. Every week for 11 months, these Irish citizens have sought a ceasefire in Gaza and now Lebanon. Among them is Kieran Perry, a member of Dublin City Council, who helps organise this demonstration each Thursday. He says the Irish have sometimes felt helpless to intervene.
They would have assumed with the huge marches that were on the public display of support that it would have forced the US and the government and the other EU governments to stop the Israelis doing what they're doing, and it hasn't. And I believe feel now that they actually have no power.
In refugee camps.
But back in May, the Irish government did intervene significantly.
We here in Ireland, we see you, we recognise you, we respect you, and today Ireland formally recognises the state of Palestine.
Ireland's Prime Minister Simon Harris said this recognition reflected his nation's own experience of occupation under British rule.
Taking our place on the world stage and being recognised by others as having the right to be there was a matter of the highest importance for the founders of our state.
After months of misery in Gaza, that day in May was a rare cause for celebration amongst Palestinians and their supporters, with similar simultaneous announcements in Spain,
the official recognition of Palestine as a state,
and Norway. For Palestine's top diplomat in Ireland, it was a happy day.
That gives me a very kind of pride. And I feel that all the time, that the Palestinian people deserve this, and we need to work even harder for other European countries and the whole world to recognize the state of Palestine.
Not merely just a symbol, Ireland's recognition actually carved out a practical pathway to long-term peace.
That gives the Palestinians at least some kind of horizon for a political solution to this plight that is going for more than seven decades.
Irish independence came only after centuries of colonialism. Across the generations in present-day Ireland, the hope now is that Palestine's own future will arrive far sooner. Willem, Marx, Al Jazeera, Dublin.
Well, in a minute, we'll be speaking to Bobby McDonough. He's a former Irish ambassador to the UK, EU and Italy. He will join us from Dublin. But first, let's speak to Espen Barth Eide. He is Norway's foreign minister. He joins us now from Oslo. Thank you so much for your time today. You've accused the West of double standards when it comes to the war in Gaza, saying that, and I quote, many Western countries hesitate to use the same type of language against violations of international humanitarian law that are easily applied when they're violated by Russia and Ukraine. Why do you think there is this double standard?
Well, indeed, I have said that, and I am, of course, totally in agreement with my Western friends that the Russian aggression is illegal and has to be condemned. But I pointed out that we also have to apply the same standards when Palestinians are the victims, particularly of violations of international humanitarian law, which are the laws of warfare, and also the human rights. And this is one of the reasons why we have very significantly engaged in how we can accelerate the path towards Palestinian statehood, recognizing the inherent right of the Palestinian people to have their own state as a part of a broader package that could take us to peace in the Middle East. And Norway, Ireland, and Spain, and Slovenia has been early European recognizers, but we encourage all states in the world to join the 149 states that have already recognized Palestine as a state. We think that will mean that the Palestinians get rights and obligations that all states have, and I think that would be important for a peaceful settlement of the eternal conflicts in the Middle East.
Right, I totally agree that you've been at the forefront in recognizing Palestine or the Palestinian rights. But over and over again, we see Israel ignore rulings by the United Nations highest court to stop persecuting Palestinians, and many times this has gone on over the last year. Is it time to acknowledge without enforcement, these sort of rulings serve little purpose?
Well, indeed, and you know that the International Court of Justice in The Hague came to a very clear conclusion in their advisory opinion this July that the occupation is illegal, and much of it pertains to annexation, and which is even a more severe violation of international law. And this view was confirmed by a large majority of the members of the UN General Assembly on the resolution that was proposed by Palestine, actually the first resolution that the Palestinian national government was able to present at the UN General Assembly.
But Foreign Minister, what has that actually achieved on the ground? Israel is still very much in a war with Gaza. Over 40,000 people have died, and now they're engaging in a war with Lebanon.
Well, indeed, that's absolutely right, and it's a tragedy that this has not been solved yet. We need ceasefires in Gaza. We need a ceasefire also in Lebanon, and we need to calm and de-escalate the situation. And a lot of forces are working to do that, but so far to no avail. That's absolutely true. But what we are working on is also what happens when a ceasefire is in place, because a ceasefire is urgently needed. It's an imperative. But it's not in itself a solution. It's just end the violence. So what we need to do, and what we are working now with a group of Arab, OIC and European countries, and in an ever larger group, is to start planning for how do we accelerate the work of establishing a Palestinian state, one Palestine, a Palestine that encompasses both the West Bank and Gaza under one leadership. And that work is extremely important. Even if it is not implemented tomorrow, it's important that more and more countries sign up to this. And you should note that despite of the ongoing conflict, the number of countries that are saying clearly and loudly that there is no other outcome of this than finally to get to a Palestinian state, that again can be part of a two-state solution. That coalition of countries is growing by the day. And I think that's really worthwhile, even if I deplore, like you, the continued ongoing violence. Israel is finding itself increasingly isolated. Of course, we respect the need for Israeli security, but we believe that Israel will be more secure and the people of Israel will be more secure if the political problem that is the core, at the core of all these conflicts is finally solved. And this is what we're working on right now with a number of other countries.
And Foreign Minister, I just want to ask you about the situation in the occupied West Bank. Back in August, Israel stopped transferring the tax revenues that it collects on behalf of the Palestinian Authority to Norway, saying that it was a punishment for Oslo's recognition of the Palestinian state, as well as its anti-Gaza war position. So despite your best efforts, you were unable to prevent this from happening. What do you think can be done now to reverse this?
So, this is, of course, not the punishment of us. This is the punishment of the Palestinian. That's the real purpose of holding back this money, which are Palestinian money. We were just helping to be a conduit for solving some technical problems with that transfer. So this is not about us at all. It's about the Palestinian people and the Palestinian national government. And we're working now with a number of countries, including the United States, who have also been very critical of Israel's decision to withhold money, to make sure that both this issue of tax revenues is solved and also an issue of what is called corresponding banking arrangements, which is also important for the Palestinian economy to work in the parts where there is still a Palestinian economy, which is the West Bank. And I think the increasing violence in the West Bank and the increasing pressure on Mohammed Mustafa, the Palestinian Prime Minister's government, is almost as dramatic as what we're seeing in Gaza. We don't have the same number of people killed, but politically this could undermine the very institution of the Palestinian national government that we need when we rebuild both Gaza and the West Bank, and when Palestine can be one and recognized as a state. So there are several tracks. It's the economic track, it's the political support, it's building the institutions of the Palestinian Authority or the Palestinian National Government, and of course also calling for universal recognition and membership of the UN. All of this is part of the package, and we work very closely here with a number of Arab states, led by Saudi Arabia, with a number of countries involved, working to offer a normalization between Arab states and Israel, but only on the condition that the Palestinian state is finally established and allowed to thrive.
Okay. I really appreciate your time. Espen Barth Eide, Norway's foreign minister, speaking to us there from Oslo.
Thank you. Shukran.
Well, we can speak now, as promised, to Bobby McDonough. He's a former Irish ambassador to the UK, EU and Italy. He joins us now live from Dublin. Thank you, sir, for your time. Do you think the international community has failed the Palestinian people?
I think what's happening to the Palestinian people is a tragedy. And therefore, in a sense, we have all failed. But that doesn't mean that the steps that have been taken are not helping to make some sort of progress on the issue. And Ireland's decision to recognise Palestine in May had the overwhelming support of the Irish people. So it doesn't stop the Israeli assaults on civilians in Gaza, but it does provide some sort of moral support for the Palestinian people. The Irish approach to this has always tried to be a balanced one. We believe in the right of Israel to live in security, but we believe in the equal right of the Palestinians to their own state. And I emphasize the word equal because they may not be as strong militarily or backed by a superpower, but morally they have an equal right to a state. And the Irish decision last May to recognise Palestine was the right one at the time, and it's becoming ever more evident that it was the right decision as we see the Netanyahu's government's attempts to make it impossible for the Palestinians ever to exercise their right to a full state.
As long as the United States continues to provide unconditional military support to Israel, is any diplomatic attempt to end this war possible?
Well, I certainly think the United States are the key to this. I think that Prime Minister Netanyahu is set on a course of confrontation with everybody in the region. I don't believe that this is what the American government wants. And I think they do put private pressure on him, but it hasn't so far been succeeding. So, yes, I don't see an end to this until the United States does find some way of using more pressure on Netanyahu to stop provoking further war in the area.
And going back to what Ireland can do, you have indeed been very vocal in supporting the Palestinian right to self-determination, but critics have said that you're not doing enough when it comes to Irish companies doing business with Israel. How do you respond to those accusations? Well, we're doing what we can. We're nationally, for example, contributing, supporting everything the United Nations does, supporting UNIFIL in Lebanon, which we've done over many years. We've recognised Palestine despite strong criticism from Israel because, of course, they don't like countries that are taking a balanced approach. That's the last thing that they want. We also try to exercise influence at the United Nations and through the European Union. I think it's fair to say that we cannot, as a small country, we cannot control the European Union's position, especially because the decision-making procedures in Europe require unanimity of the member states. But it's undoubtedly true that over the last year, the European Union's overall position has shifted significantly more towards our view on the need for an immediate ceasefire. It's not just Ireland, but it's the other countries you mentioned, like Spain and Slovenia and Belgium, indeed, that try to shift the European Union's position along. So it is frustrating to see what's happening. It's upsetting to see what's happening, but we can only do what we can do. And what do you see happening now? We've seen Israel expand its war into neighbouring Lebanon. It's even threatening Iran with attacks. And obviously the war in Gaza continues now. We're now into the second year. How do you see this developing?
Well, on the military front, it's very difficult to be optimistic that things will be brought to an end soon. But you can't, unfortunately, bring that to an end simply by saying things that are morally correct. That's something that, as you say yourself, requires a different sort of pressure. But I think the very fact of taking a balanced approach and calling for peace and calling for ceasefires is not negligible. It doesn't achieve what it wants to achieve, but it does help to shift the dial a little bit. It puts a little bit more pressure on Israel. What can be said is that there is no solution that is a military solution. I mean, this is the great tragedy that the Netanyahu government is not building up security for Israel. It's building up future war and future tragedy. And there are, of course, internal pressures in Israel as well, especially to have a ceasefire to get the release of the hostages. So given Netanyahu's approach, it's difficult to be optimistic. But I suppose the only optimism one can put, two aspects of optimism. One is that there are quite a number of voices that are sane and reasonable and balanced. But the other is that ultimately there can only be peace and security for Israel if it gets on with its neighbours. And if the issue of the rights of the Palestinians to their own state is fully vindicated. I mean, the fact is that lies at the heart of everything that's happening now in the Middle East. And unless and until the Palestinians can fully exercise their equal right to Israel to have a state, Israel is not going to be secure.
Has this war and the events of the last year made you look at international diplomacy in a different way?
Not really. I mean, I understand your frustration, the questions that you've been putting to me and to the Norwegian Foreign Minister about the lack of progress. But diplomacy has never been able to disarm people with weapons. It's only one of the factors in any situation. And the United Nations has never been as strong as one would like it to be because of the nature of its decision-making, because of the veto power that's there. So I haven't ever believed that international diplomacy can solve everything, and I still don't believe that now. But I also believe that international diplomacy can only be a positive force and is something that must be used to maximum effect.
Bobby McDonough, really appreciate your time today on Al Jazeera English, former Irish ambassador to the UK, EU and Italy.
Thank you.